Okay, let's try and unpack this. Imagine someone who doesn't just bet big, but bets everything. Their entire fortune, again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And not just on, regular business ideas, but on things that sound almost impossible, like building rockets that land themselves.
Right, or making electric cars the mainstream.
Yeah.
Or linking brains to computers.
Exactly, or even just digging tunnels differently. It's this sheer scale of ambition, plus this willingness to risk absolutely everything. It feels like it doesn't just play the game, it fundamentally changes the rules.
It really does set the stage.
So welcome, everyone, to Deep Dive Legends. This is our very first deep dive.
Yeah, exciting.
The whole idea here is simple. We take a whole stack of source material, articles, research notes, whatever you've given us, and we dive deep. We pull out the crucial insights, the stuff you really need to know.
Think of it as your shortcut, to being properly informed.
Yeah.
We connect the dots, give you the context.
And this first deep dive is all about exploring the sources you shared on a figure who's just undeniably reshaped multiple industries. Elon Musk.
He's, a perfect first subject for a series on people who changed the game.
Yeah.
Based on everything we've read.
So what have we got in the sources?
Well, the material you've provided really maps out an incredible journey. We start with the early days, things like Zip2, PayPal.
Right, the .com stuff.
Exactly. Then the big ones, Tesla and SpaceX, which are transformative, and then into the newer, maybe even bolder ventures, Neuralink. The boring company.
And of course, the whole Twitter saga, now X.
Definitely X. And crucially, these sources, they don't just focus on the successes. They really dig into the controversies, the criticisms.
Yeah.
That's a constant thread.
So our goal today, to really understand the arc that this material presents, the sheer ambition, the risks involved, and I guess the paradoxes, his public image versus the business practices described.
Yeah, let's piece it together from these sources.
Okay, so right back at the beginning. The sources paint this picture of, rapid early wins. He co-founds Zip2 in 95.
Mm-hmm.
And just 4 years later, 1999, it sells to Compaq for, what was it, over $300 million?
$307 million, yeah. That's a huge exit for a first major company.
Yes.
And the sources highlight something important here. He personally got $22 million from that sale. A lot of money.
Definitely.
But instead of, taking it easy, he immediately plowed $12 million of that into his next thing. Same year.
Wow. Okay. Straight back in. What was the next thing?
X.com, an online financial services, sort of e-payment company. Shows that pattern early on, right?
Right.
Reinvesting heavily, high stakes right from the get-go.
X.com. That name keeps coming back, doesn't it? We'll get to that.
We will. But first, X.com merged with another company, Confinity, in 2000.
Okay.
And that combination eventually rebranded into a name everyone knows, PayPal.
Ah, right. PayPal. And that was an even bigger success story.
Oh, much bigger. The sources say eBay bought PayPal in 2002 for $1.5 billion in stock.
$1.5 billion.
And he was the largest shareholder at the time. His take from that sale was around $176 million.
Okay, so two massive exits. Back to back, almost. Before SpaceX, before Tesla. That's a serious amount of capital generated early on.
Absolutely. Sets the stage for everything that follows.
And you mentioned he later bought back the X.com domain. What do the sources say about that?
Yeah, apparently he bought it back years later, citing sentimental value. But it also connects, doesn't it, to his later stated goal of creating an everything app.
Ah, the X app vision.
Which was a big part of the justification for rebranding Twitter to X. So maybe that idea was brewing for a long, long time.
Fascinating. Okay, so from online payments to shooting rockets into space. That feels like quite a leap. What sparked that, according to the sources?
Well, the sources describe his interest shifting dramatically after PayPal. He got involved with the Mars Society.
We're in Mars Society, okay.
Yeah, pledged some money, joined the board for a bit, apparently discussed funding a project to grow plants on Mars, a sort of experimental greenhouse.
So the interest was there, but how did it become practical, like building rockets?
He got very practical very fast. The sources talk about these trips he took to Moscow in 2001, 2002.
To Russia? To buy rockets? Seriously?
Yep. Trying to buy refurbished Russian ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, to convert for space launch.
Wow.
But the sources say he was kind of seen as a rich amateur, a novice. And on the second trip, the Russians offered him one rocket for, $8 million.
And he said no.
He rejected it. Said it was still too expensive for what he wanted to achieve.
Okay. And there's that story in the sources, too, about someone spitting on his shoes.
Yeah, a Russian chief designer, apparently. That moment, combined with the rejection, is framed in the sources as the turning point. if he couldn't buy affordable rockets.
He'd build them himself.
Exactly. That's the genesis of SpaceX right there.
So SpaceX is born. When was this?
May 2002. The original name was actually Space Exploration Technologies Corporation. Kind of a mouthful. Got nicknamed SET briefly, then quickly became SpaceX. And he put his own money in $100 million. Became CEO and chief engineer.
100 million of his PayPal money.
Yeah.
That's betting the farm again.
A huge personal gamble.
Yeah.
And the sources are very clear. Those early years were incredibly tough.
Right. The Falcon 1 rocket failures.
Brutal. First launch attempt, 2006, failed. Then 2 more failures after that.
3 failures in a row.
Yeah. And the sources really emphasize this point. Those failures, plus the money pouring into Tesla at the same time, nearly bankrupted him. Both companies were on the verge of collapse. It highlights that financial brinkmanship the sources talk about.
So close to losing it all. What saved them?
The 4th try. September 2008. The sources describe this as absolutely critical. Falcon 1 finally reached orbit.
The breakthrough.
That success was everything. It directly led to NASA giving them a huge contract later that year, $1.6 billion, for commercial resupply services, flying cargo to the International Space Station using their next rocket, the Falcon 9, and the Dragon capsule. That NASA contract was massive validation.
And from there, they started chasing that really ambitious goal. Reusable rockets.
Yeah, something a lot of people in the industry thought was just not practical.
Yeah.
Maybe impossible from a cost perspective.
But they pushed ahead.
They did. The sources detail those milestones. First successful landing of a Falcon 9 first stage back on land in 2015.
I remember seeing those videos. Incredible.
Then landing them on the drone ships out in the ocean. Game-changing stuff potentially.
What about bigger rockets? Falcon Heavy.
Falcon Heavy. First launch in 2018. That was the one where the payload was his own cherry red Tesla Roadster.
Right. With Starman in the driver's seat.
Musk.
A very public, very characteristic statement. And now the sources talk a lot about Starship. That's the big one they've been developing since around 2019.
The fully reusable super heavy lift thing. That's the one. Designed to eventually replace Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. They did the first full-stack orbital test flight in 2023. Didn't quite make orbit, but a big step.
And they also achieved something only governments had done before, right? Putting people into orbit.
Yes, huge milestone. The Demo 2 mission in 2020, the sources highlight this. SpaceX became the first private company ever to launch astronauts into orbit and dock with the ISS.
Truly historic.
And looking ahead, the sources mention NASA just gave SpaceX another big contract in 2024, $843 million, to eventually deorbit the ISS when it's retired.
So how is all this funded? It sounds incredibly expensive. The sources mention a mix.
It's complex. Initially, Falcon 1, the early engines, that was mostly his private money, big risk.
Right, the $100 million.
For Falcon 9, they got some government development funding through NASA programs like SEOTS. But the sources suggest that the later really big leaps, Falcon Heavy, the Raptor engines for Starship, the whole reusability tech that was largely privately funded again.
So a blend. But they're also a major NASA contractor now.
Oh, yeah. As of 2023, the sources state SpaceX is NASA's single largest contractor. It's this interesting dance between private capital, Musk's vision, and government partnership.
But it hasn't all been smooth sailing, even with the successes. The sources detail criticisms.
Absolutely. Lots of questions raised in the material. Things like, is SpaceX really profitable? And do the cost savings from reusing rockets actually work out economically once you factor in refurbishment and development compared to just building new ones?
Fair questions.
And concerns about build quality, safety, those pop up too. The sources mentioned the investigation into that Falcon 9 explosion back in September 2016. It happened on the launch pad during fueling.
I remember that. What did they find?
Well, the interim results mentioned in the sources pointed towards a problem with the cryogenic helium cylinder inside the oxygen tank. A breach, basically.
Okay. And the Starship test flight failure in 2023.
That's another example the sources bring up. The rocket launched, but had multiple engine failures, started tumbling, and eventually the flight termination system had to be activated. So yeah, big achievements, but also significant failures and ongoing questions presented in the source material.
Okay, so groundbreaking stuff in space, but not without serious challenges and scrutiny. Let's pivot now. Another huge industry disruption, electric vehicles. Tesla. Now, the sources are clear. He didn't actually found Tesla, did he?
No, that's correct, and it's a key point in the sources. Tesla Motors was founded back in 2003 by 2 engineers, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning.
What was their background?
They actually came from the e-reader World Nouveau Media, the Rocket ebook. But their idea for Tesla was driven by a love for sports cars combined with real concerns about climate change and oil dependency. The sources also mentioned J.B. Straubel and Ian Wright as other co-founders.
And their vision was different from other EVs at the time.
Totally different. The sources explained they wanted to build a high-performance, desirable electric sports car. Something cool, using lithium-ion batteries, which is pretty novel for cars then. They wanted to completely shatter that image of EVs being slow, boring, limited-range golf carts.
Which led them to develop the Roadster.
Their first car, yeah. Delivered starting in 2008. And the engineering, according to the sources, was complex. They licensed some core tech from a company called AC Propulsion, used a modified Lotus chassis.
Right, it looked like a Lotus.
But then they had to figure out how to stuff nearly 7,000 individual lithium-ion battery cells into it. That required totally new cooling systems, software, safety features. It was a major undertaking.
But it worked, performance-wise.
Oh, yeah. The sources cite a range of around 245 miles, which was unheard of then, and 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. It really was the first mass-produced all-electric car using those lithium-ion cells. A trailblazer.
So where did Musk come into the picture?
Eberhard and Tarpening bootstrapped the early work, but by 2004, they needed serious funding to actually build the car. The sources say Musk invested $6.3 million in that early round.
And that gave him a major stake.
Yes, he became chairman of the board and the majority shareholder. The sources do credit the original founders, though, with pioneering the lithium-ion approach, the business plan of starting high-end, building the brand, and assembling the initial team and tech.
Got it. And from that Roadster, Tesla obviously expanded massively. It really shook up the whole auto world.
Hugely. The sources list the subsequent models.
Yeah.
The Model S sedan in 2012, the Model X SUV with those Falcon Wind doors in 2015.
Right.
Then the big one, the Model 3 in 2017, aimed at a more mainstream market. And the Model Y crossover in 2020. Plus the Cybertruck, unveiled in 2019 with deliveries starting late 2023.
And the sales numbers. The sources mention some pretty staggering figures.
They really are remarkable. The Model 3 apparently became the best-selling plug-in EV of all time, globally. First EV to hit 1 million sales, the sources say, around 2020 or 2021.
1 million EVs of one model.
Wow. And then the Model Y overtook it. The sources note that by December 2023, the Model Y wasn't just the best-selling EV, it became the best-selling car, period. Any type, worldwide.
Best-selling car in the world. That's incredible market disruption.
Absolutely. And supporting all that growth required building those massive gigafactories for batteries and vehicles.
Okay, but just like SpaceX, the sources document a lot of controversy around Tesla. Let's get into that, starting right back at the founding story itself.
Yeah, that's a persistent point of friction in the sources.
Yeah.
There were significant conflicts between Musk and the original founders, especially Martin Eberhard.
What kind of conflict?
Accusations flew back and forth. Sources mention claims that Musk pushed for expensive, difficult features that delayed the Roadster, and that he ultimately orchestrated Eberhard's removal after Musk took over as CEO. It's a contentious history.
And his management style at Tesla also comes under fire in the sources.
Frequently. You read accounts in the source material describing extreme micromanagement, these incredibly intense periods dubbed production hell.
Right, trying to ramp up Model 3 production.
Exactly. Accusations of wasted resources, a sometimes callous approach to employees. And the sources mention things like the mandate for workers to return to the office 40 hours a week being quite controversial, too.
What about public statements? The sources mention issues there, too, like timelines and finances.
Yes. That's a recurring theme. Accusations that he's overstated product readiness, maybe even misled people about the company's financial health at times. He sets these incredibly aggressive public timelines.
Which they often miss.
They often miss them, yes. Though, to be fair, the sources also note they often do eventually hit many of those ambitious goals, just later than promised. But those delays fuel criticism, with some sources even using terms like fraud.
And the autopilot system, the sources seem particularly concerned about that.
That's a major area of controversy highlighted in the material. Some sources describe the way autopilot was rolled out as recklessly stupid.
Strong words.
Yeah. Claims that safety statistics were spun, that known limitations of the system were downplayed. There's even an allegation mentioned in the sources that Tesla knew about a fatal crash involving autopilot in China before a similar highly publicized fatality happened in Florida. These are very serious points raised.
Wow, okay. And then there's the valuation. Tesla's market cap has been astronomical compared to traditional car companies, even with lower sales volumes. How do the sources explain that debate?
It's a huge debate covered in the sources. One side argues Tesla isn't just a car company. They see it as a tech company, an AI company.
With potential beyond cars.
Right. Renewable energy, battery storage, software, AI development, like the Dojo supercomputer. These analysts, cited in the sources, argue that potential justifies the higher valuation.
But there are counter-arguments in the sources, too.
Oh, absolutely. Critics argue the AI lead might be overstated, especially with big tech giants also investing heavily. They question if the valuation is sustainable. But then proponents point to Tesla's vertical integration, controlling batteries, software, charging network, sales as a key competitive advantage. The sources really lay out both perspectives on this.
And recently, the sources mentioned specific headwinds for Tesla.
Yes, they note a reported decline in annual sales in 2024, which is a significant shift after years of rapid growth, and also that huge $56 billion pay package for Musk being invalidated by a judge in Delaware.
So Tesla, revolutionary impact, massive growth, but also, according to the sources, plagued by controversy around its origins, management, safety claims, and valuation. Okay, let's move beyond cars and rockets. Neuralink. Brain-computer interfaces. Sounds like science fiction.
It really does. Neuralink was co-founded by him in 2016. He reportedly put in $100 million of his own money again.
Another big personal bet.
Yep. And the sources describe its goal as developing this incredibly high bandwidth, precise way for the brain to communicate directly with external devices. A neurotechnology startup.
The potential sounds incredible. A new era of medicine, some sources suggest.
The potential upside, especially for paralysis, blindness, other neurological conditions, is presented as immense. But the sources immediately pivot to the other side of that coin, the ethical considerations.
Right. This sounds like it opens up a whole can of worms.
A huge one.
Yeah.
The sources talk about societal impacts, privacy risks, the potential for misuse, the need for really careful, responsible innovation. They list out technological challenges, medical hurdles, legal issues, and those deep ethical questions.
What progress have they actually shown, according to the sources?
Well, there was that live stream demo in 2024. Showed a paralyzed person apparently playing online chess using the Neuralink implant.
Wow.
And one source mentions him publicly claiming, quite boldly, that Neuralink is curing blindness.
Curing blindness, that's a huge claim, but
Yeah.
they hit regulatory roadblocks.
They did. The sources note that the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, actually rejected Neuralink's first application to start human trials back in March 2023. They cited safety risks that needed more work.
Okay, so extremely high potential, very high risk, major ethical questions, and regulatory hurdles still to clear. That's the picture from the sources on Neuralink. What about the Boring Company digging tunnels?
Right, founded to build tunnels, mainly for his loop and hyperloop transportation concept.
Yeah.
The sources show kind of a mixed bag of progress here.
Some projects didn't happen.
Yeah, some high-profile ones announced back in 2018, like a loop for Chicago O'Hare Airport and one in West LA. Those got canceled, according to the sources.
But some have been built.
Yes. The main example the sources point to is the Las Vegas Convention Center loop. It's about 1.7 miles long, 3 stations. Built relatively fast, about a year, for $47 million.
And it works.
Sources say it does what it promised. Uses Tesla vehicles in the tunnels to cut what was maybe a 45-minute walk across the sprawling convention center down to about a 2-minute ride. Apparently, they built it without disrupting the conventions happening right above them.
Okay.
Any others in Vegas?
Yeah, they built a connector to Resorts World Casino. Phases 1 and 2 done. Phase 3 starting late 2023, according to the sources. It's part of a bigger vision called the Vegas Loop.
What's that?
The sources describe plans to eventually connect the convention center, resorts on the Strip, the airport, the football stadium, all with these tunnels using Teslas. They quote claims of big-time savings, like a 30-minute drive to the stadium becoming a 4-minute loop trip.
Interesting. And they have a test tunnel somewhere, too.
Right. In Hawthorne, California, near SpaceX HQ. About 1.1 miles long, finished in 2018 for apparently less than $10 million. Used for testing both the loop concept and the more ambitious Hyperloop idea.
Okay, so what's the status of Hyperloop itself, that ultra-fast pods and tubes concept?
The sources describe the vision. Pods traveling over 600 miles per hour. The Boring Company built a test track, about 0.8 miles long, back in 2016, mostly used for student competitions. Pods apparently reach speeds up to 288 miles per hour there.
So not quite 600 miles per hour yet.
No. The sources suggest they're currently more in the consulting phase, with Hyperloop talking to governments, stakeholders, about whether it's actually feasible to build in cities. So Loop is operational on a small scale. Hyperloop is still much more conceptual, based on the sources.
Got it. Okay, finally, let's get into maybe the most talked about move recently. Buying Twitter, now X.
Yeah, that definitely generated headlines. The sources covered extensively. He acquired Twitter in October 2022 for around $44 billion, took over as CEO immediately, later rebranded the whole thing to X Corp.
What do the sources say about why he wanted to buy it? His interest went back a while.
It seems so. Sources mention him questioning Twitter's commitment to free speech as far back as 2017. There's also detail in one source about his ex-wife, Tallulah Riley, supposedly urging him to buy it to push back against what she called wokeism.
Interesting. How did the actual purchase happen? It wasn't straightforward, was it?
No, it was quite dramatic. The sources say he started buying up shares quietly in January 2022. By April, he revealed he owned 9.2%, making him the largest shareholder.
And Twitter's board wasn't thrilled?
They reacted defensively, adopted a poison pill strategy, which is designed to make a hostile takeover really expensive or difficult. Basically, it lets other shareholders buy more stock cheap, diluting the acquirer's stake.
But he pushed ahead anyway.
He did, made an offer, eventually settled on the $44 billion price tag. And the funding, the sources detail, was complex. Billions in loans, partly secured against his own Tesla stock, plus equity financing from various partners.
And since he took over, it's been pretty chaotic, according to the sources.
Absolutely. Lots of turmoil and controversy reported. One major thing was the release of internal Twitter documents. He called them the Twitter files.
Right, related to the Hunter Biden laptop story moderation.
Exactly. He and some Republican figures alleged these files showed government censorship, specifically FBI involvement. However, the sources also point out that Twitter's own lawyers denied this in court, and journalists like Matt Taibbi, who were given access to the files by Musk, stated they didn't find evidence of the FBI actually ordering censorship. So a lot of debate and different interpretations presented in the sources there.
There was also that public poll he ran.
Oh yeah, December 2022. He put up a poll asking Twitter users if he should step down as CEO.
And they said yes.
Overwhelmingly yes. He then said he'd honor the result and resign once he found a replacement, which he did, appointing Linda Yaccarino, who started in May 2023.
What about the business side? How has X fared financially since the takeover, according to the sources?
The sources paint a pretty challenging picture. They mention X suing the watchdog group Media Matters after a report about ads appearing next to extremist content. More broadly, the financial impact seems severe.
How severe?
Sources report investors marking down the value significantly, billions lost. Some estimates cited suggest X was worth maybe 80% less by late 2024 compared to what he paid. And the banks that loaned him money for the deal were reportedly preparing to sell off those loans at a steep discount in early 2025.
Wow, 80% less. That's stark. Okay, the sources also briefly touch on another venture, XAI, and a recent political role.
Yes. Quickly, the sources note he founded an artificial intelligence company called XAI, separate from his other ventures but aiming to compete in that space. And then, reporting neutrally, as the sources do, there was the announcement in November 2024 by President-elect Donald Trump.
What was that?
Trump announced that Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy would co-lead a new task force, or maybe department, focused on government efficiency, nicknamed DOGE. The sources also note Ramaswamy later stepped down before it was formally created, just presented as a very recent development in his sphere of influence.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together now from the sources, the early tech wins, then SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, Boring Company X, it's just this picture of relentless, massive ambition.
Absolutely. The scale is just hard to comprehend sometimes. And the material consistently shows this ambition is fueled by, or maybe requires, taking these absolutely enormous risks.
Betting his fortune, pushing tech limits way past what seemed possible, setting those crazy timelines.
Right. And the sources do present aspects of this as, well, genius, or at least incredible technical vision, shaking up entire industries, achieving things experts said couldn't be done, or not for decades, driving progress even if deadlines slip. The sources definitely credit him with accelerating change in space, in autos, potentially elsewhere.
But running through all the sources, there are these constant, significant criticisms, perceived flaws that seem baked into his public persona, his way of operating.
Exactly. It's all laid out there in the source material. The controversial public statements, sometimes offensive, sometimes just combative. The management style, the hardcore demands, treatment of employees, safety concerns raised.
Those unrealistic timelines, again, leading to the accusations of lying or misleading people.
Yep. And the sources even mention specialists in fields like transportation questioning his technical grasp on things like the original Hyperloop white paper. There are also those apparent contradictions pointed out, like advocating for sustainable energy while having a large personal carbon footprint from private jet use, according to reports cited.
Yeah.
These criticisms are presented as major parts of his story.
So what really comes through from these sources is this powerful tension, isn't it? Between the incredibly ambitious, often inspiring goals he states.
Making humanity multiplanetary, sustainable energy, free speech, helping people with disabilities.
And the methods he uses, the controversies he courts, the criticisms of his leadership, and the real-world struggles his companies sometimes face, like Tesla's sales dip or X's value collapse.
It's a narrative woven from big visions, incredibly bold risks, and undeniable persistent controversy. That's what the sources give us.
And that really brings us to the end of this first deep dive for Deep Dive Legends, looking at the sources you provided on Elon Musk. We've covered a lot of ground from Zip2 and PayPal right through SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, Boring X. And we've tried to be diligent in highlighting both the achievements and the significant criticisms detailed in the material.
And the core question these sources seem to leave us with is, what makes someone this impactful, capable of generating such passionate support and such intense criticism, often at the same time? It's really a story about innovation, leadership, risk, and how we perceive all that in the 21st century.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed, from the sources, the controversies, the criticisms, weighed against those undeniable achievements, the sheer scale of the risks taken, how do you, listening, start to evaluate the legacy of someone like this? Someone so willing to just break things, push boundaries, sometimes maybe too aggressively. What does his journey, as presented here, tell us about progress, leadership, and maybe even ourselves today? Something to definitely keep thinking about. This has been The Deep Dive. Join us next time as we plunge into the sources surrounding another individual who truly changed the game.